My friends, what we show to the world, the polished smile, the charming words, the acts of kindness, is but a thin mask stretched across the depths of a more complex being. Beneath this mask lies another presence, the disowned, the feared, the rejected part of ourselves, the monster. We are taught to deny this monster, to banish it into the forgotten corridors of our unconscious. We wear the smile as armor, believing that goodness demands the death of darkness. Yet what is denied only grows stronger in the shadow. To truly live, we must gather our courage and approach the monster not as an enemy, but as a lost companion. For the monster behind the smile is not an aberration of your nature. It is your nature, unrefined and crying out for acknowledgement. In every shadow, there is life. In every fear, a hidden wisdom. The parts of ourselves we most wish to erase are often those with the greatest energy for our becoming. Loving the monster does not mean surrendering to chaos or evil. It means facing the darkness with open eyes, recognizing that it holds a piece of our forgotten wholeness. It means understanding that our rage conceals our boundaries, our envy conceals our aspirations, our sorrow conceals our capacity to love. The path to individuation, to true, unique selfhood, passes through the heart of the shadow, not by slaying the dragon, but by riding it. Do we come into our true power? Therefore, when you see the smile, whether your own or another's, let it be not a deception, but an invitation. Behind every polished surface is a wilderness waiting to be embraced. Behind every courteous gesture is a deep river of passions waiting to be understood. In loving the monster behind the smile, we do not fall into darkness, we bring the darkness into the light, we become vast, we become real. Each human being, though appearing simple in manner and outward conduct, carries within an intricate architecture of the psyche, a construction built not only from conscious decisions and noble ideals, but from elements often disavowed and hidden from view. At the heart of this concealed structure lies the shadow self, the sum of all that we repress, deny, or fail to recognize within ourselves. The shadow is not an invention of imagination or merely a poetic symbol. It is a living and active portion of our reality, shaping our actions, emotions, and relationships from the depths. The existence of the shadow is a natural consequence of the development of consciousness. As we grow and are shaped by family, culture, and society, we are taught implicitly and explicitly what is acceptable and what must be cast aside. The child who is punished for anger learns to suppress their rage. The dreamer laughed at for their visions hides their creative impulses. These disowned aspects do not disappear. Rather, they are exiled into the unconscious. There, divorced from the governance of the ego, they gather power. The shadow becomes then a container for all that the conscious mind refuses to incorporate, including qualities that may be vital, vibrant and necessary for the full expression of the tragic irony is that while the shadow is born from the attempt to maintain order and social harmony, it does not submit passively to neglect. Instead, it seeks expression, often in distorted or destructive ways. Unacknowledged anger erupts as cruelty, suppressed fear manifests as prejudice, denied longing twists into addiction. The more rigorously we strive to present a flawless persona to the world, the more vehemently the shadow asserts itself through unintended. We may find ourselves behaving in ways we cannot explain, sabotaging our own success, repeating harmful patterns, or projecting our disowned traits onto others, seeing in them the very qualities we refuse to admit in ourselves. Understanding the shadow is not a call to despair, but an invitation to a greater wholeness. To confront the shadow is to embark on a courageous journey inward, a descent into the dark places where our true complexity resides. It requires a radical honesty, a willingness to see oneself not only as victim but as perpetrator, not only as noble but as fallible. Such an undertaking is fraught with discomfort, for it destabilizes the cherished images we hold of ourselves. Yet it is precisely in this encounter with the shadow that the seeds of transformation are planted. The integration of the shadow does not mean indulging every base impulse or giving free rein to destructive behavior. Rather, it involves bringing the shadow into conscious awareness, examining it, learning from it, and finding a rightful place for its energies within the broader framework of the self. When we accept responsibility for our darker tendencies, we cease to be their helpless victims. In recognizing our potential for cruelty, we become more compassionate. In acknowledging our fears, we become braver. The shadow, once feared as an enemy, reveals itself as a guide toward authenticity. This process, however, cannot be hurried or forced. The shadow is cunning at disguise. It often presents itself first in dreams, metaphors, slips of the tongue, sudden bursts of emotion. It may appear in the figures we most despise or fear in others, for the shadow often makes itself known through projection. When we are irrationally angry at someone else's arrogance, it may be our own unclaimed pride we are seeing. When we judge another's weakness, it may be our own vulnerability we refuse to face. Each encounter with the shadow outside of ourselves is a mirror held up to the parts of us waiting for acknowledgement. The necessity of this work becomes clearer when we consider the alternative. A life lived in ignorance of the shadow is a life lived in fragmentation. It is a life governed by unconscious drives and compulsions, wherein much of our energy is spent maintaining the fragile edifice of the persona. It is also a life prone to deep inner conflict, self-betrayal, and repeated suffering. True freedom, Jung taught, comes not from the elimination of inner conflict, but from the reconciliation of opposites within the psyche. To deny the shadow is to deny a part of our humanity. To embrace it is to step into the vastness of the soul. The shadow is not purely negative. It contains not only our most despised traits, but also our buried talents, neglected passions, and hidden strengths. The anger that we have buried may hold the key to our capacity for assertiveness and protection. The sorrow we have locked away may be the source of profound empathy and creativity. The rebellion we have suppressed may fuel our courage to challenge injustice. In this sense, the shadow is a reservoir of life force, a source of renewal and depth. To integrate it is to tap into a richer, more vibrant way of being, yet this integration demands humility. We must accept that we are not wholly who we imagined ourselves to be. We are not simply good or evil, wise or foolish, strong or weak. We are a dynamic interplay of contradictions. And it is this very interplay that gives rise to growth. The individuated self is not a perfected being, but a being who holds their contradictions consciously, who moves with awareness between the polarities of existence. The cultivation of a relationship with the shadow requires practices of reflection, self-inquiry, and often a guided encounter through therapeutic or spiritual work. It is a path that requires patience and great compassion, for much of what we discover will initially provoke resistance, shame, or fear. But if we persist, if we are gentle yet unflinching, we will find that the shadow ceases to be a feared stranger and becomes an essential companion on our path to wholeness. Thus, the shadow stands at the threshold of every transformation. To know oneself truly, to live authentically, one must be willing to meet the shadow face to face. It is there, in the darkness we have fled, that the treasure lies hidden. It is there, beyond the mask, beyond the denial, that the full majesty of our being waits to be claimed. In the unfolding of a human life, there arises a necessity to wear masks. These masks are not born from malice or deception, but from the need to find a place within the intricate web of society. From the earliest days of childhood, the individual is taught to modulate expressions, to curb instincts, to smile when hurting, to appear composed when internally collapsed. This gradual shaping gives rise to what Carl Jung named the persona, the social face an individual presents to the world, a mask designed to make a particular impression and to conceal the true nature of the self beneath. The persona serves a vital function. It protects the individual from the full exposure of raw vulnerability. It provides a channel through which the individual can navigate the expectations of family, community, profession, and culture. Without a persona, a person risks being misunderstood, alienated, or overwhelmed by the demands of existence. Thus, it is not the existence of the mask that is problematic, but the mistaken identification. When an individual comes to believe that the mask is the entirety of their being, when the performance replaces the living soul, then psychic imbalance inevitably follows. Beneath the carefully curated persona lies the authentic self, with all its conflicting desires, passions, fears, and dreams. Yet the more rigid and perfected the persona becomes, the more it demands the suppression of that authentic self. The self must then retreat into the unconscious, into hidden and sometimes volatile regions of the psyche. This dissonance between the mask and the hidden self breeds a quiet but persistent inner conflict. The person becomes a stranger to themselves, living not from their own depths, but from the expectations and roles assigned to them by the external world. In the pursuit of belonging, many fall into the trap of polishing their persona to a brilliant sheen. They become what others admire: the model student, the dutiful worker, the attentive partner, the obedient citizen. Yet all the while the truer, wilder impulses, the unspoken fears, the untamed ambitions, the buried griefs are denied a voice. This denial does not dissolve these inner realities. It only forces them to find indirect expression. They surface in the quiet misery that clings to outward success, in the restlessness that no achievement can appease, in the sudden and inexplicable outbursts that seem to come from nowhere. When the gap between the persona and the true self grows too wide, the soul suffers. There may arise a feeling of hollowness, a profound disconnection from meaning and vitality. Life becomes a series of performances rather than an unfolding journey. Depression, anxiety, and existential dread often emerge as symptoms of this. The individual senses that something vital is missing, but they cannot name it, for they have forgotten that the persona is not who they truly are. To heal this rift requires a deliberate and courageous active consciousness. It demands a turning inward, a questioning of the roles and images we have embraced. Who am I beneath the mask I wear? Whose expectations am I striving to meet? What have I sacrificed at the altar of social approval? These are not easy questions. To answer them often means dismantling structures we have clung to for years, even decades. It means risking misunderstanding, rejection, and the uncertainty of stepping into an identity not sanctioned by the collective. Yet without this inner confrontation, the individual remains fragmented, living a borrowed life instead of their own. The work of peeling back the persona is not about abandoning all social roles or becoming wild and unbound. It is about ensuring that the roles we play are animated by the truth of our being rather than dictated solely by fear and conformity. It is about allowing the authentic self to infuse the persona so that what we show to the world is a true reflection, not a hollow fabrication. Paradoxically, when we face the falseness of the persona and embrace the disowned parts of ourselves, the mask becomes less necessary. We discover that the world is less fragile than we believed, and that we are less alone. Authenticity does not repel others as we fear it will. Rather, it calls forth authenticity in them. We come to see that true connection arises not when we hide our brokenness, but when we allow it to be seen and accepted. The journey into the hidden self is often marked by encounters with shadow figures, aspects of the psyche that embody the very traits we have rejected. These figures may appear in dreams, in sudden moves, in the figures of others who evoke strong reactions within us. To meet them without judgment, to listen to what they have to say, is to reclaim fragments of our soul lost in the construction of the persona. It is to acknowledge that the smile we offer the world often masks a profound complexity, a rich and turbulent emotional landscape. This is not a journey for the faint of heart. It requires patience, humility, and a willingness to dwell in ambiguity. The self is not a static entity, but a living, evolving mystery. To uncover it is not to arrive at a final fixed identity, but to enter into a lifelong dialogue with the depths within. Each layer of the persona that we shed reveals new possibilities of being, new dimensions of freedom. The reward for such work is profound. To live from the authentic self is to move with a sense of rootedness and resilience. It is to act not out of compulsion or fear, but out of a deep knowing of one's true nature. It is to experience relationships as meeting places of souls rather than collisions of masks. It is to find meaning not in the applause of the crowd, but in the quiet certainty that one is living in fidelity to the inner truth. Yet even as we peel back the layers of persona, we must recognize that the mask will never disappear entirely. It is part of our human condition to play roles, to adapt, to mediate between the inner and our worlds. The task is not to annihilate the persona, but to make it permeable, flexible, alive. A healthy persona becomes a bridge rather than a wall, allowing the self to shine through without being consumed by exposure. In the end, we see that the mask and the persona are neither inherently good nor evil. They are tools, necessities of social life. But when mistaken for the totality of being, they imprison rather than protect. To live authentically is to honor the role of the persona while remaining anchored in the deeper currents of the soul. In doing so, we transcend the shallow approval of society and touch the infinite richness of our own humanity, recognizing at last that the smile we offer the world often conceals deeper emotional reality. Love, in its deepest and truest sense, is not the mere sentimentality often portrayed by the world, nor is it simply a fleeting emotion that rises and falls with circumstance. Love, rightly understood, is a profound and courageous act of seeing. It is the willingness to face the whole of oneself and the whole of another. Not only the pleasant, shining attributes, but also the fractured, chaotic, and painful aspects that are often hidden away. When we speak of love as a path of integration, we are invoking a force that does not simply bind people together superficially, but rather a force that weaves the torn fabric of the psyche back into whole. The process of becoming whole, what Jung called individuation, demands that we encounter all the parts of ourselves we would rather ignore, deny, or suppress. Within each of us lives not only the conscious self, the rational, social, presentable face, but also a multitude of forgotten selves. The angry child, the abandoned dreamer, the fearful outcast, the rebellious spirit. These elements do not vanish because we have turned away from them. They linger in the unconscious, coloring our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in ways that often confound us. To heal, we must not wage war against these inner figures, nor exile them further into darkness. We must turn toward them with love. Love in this context is not indulgence. It does not mean permitting destructive impulses to rule unchallenged. Rather, it means approaching even the most troubling aspects of the self with understanding, patience, and respect. It means recognizing that the rejected parts of us carry legitimate needs, wounds, and lessons that we have yet to acknowledge. The rage that erupts seemingly without cause may hold the story of a boundary violated long ago. The jealousy we find shameful may illuminate the unfulfilled desires we have buried beneath layers of duty and conformity. The despair we hide from the world may reveal the depth of our yearning for meaning and connection. Love sees these aspects not as enemies but as messengers, as vital fragments of the soul that must be welcomed back if we are to be whole. To walk the path of integration through love requires a certain radical honesty. It demands that we cease pretending to be better, wiser, or more serene than we truly are. It invites us to remove the armor of perfectionism and expose the raw, imperfect being within. In doing so, we open ourselves to the risk of disappointment, rejection, and pain, for there is no guarantee that the world will meet our vulnerability with kindness. Yet even if the outer world remains indifferent or cruel, the inner movement towards self-acceptance plants seeds of profound healing. What is often overlooked is that love of the self and love of the other are inseparable. When we despise our own weaknesses, we inevitably judge harshly the weaknesses of others. When we fear our own inner chaos, we become intolerant of the chaos we see in those around us. But as we learn to meet our inner woundedness with compassion, we naturally extend the same compassion outward. We cease to demand that others conform to impossible ideals because we have ceased to demand it of ourselves. We can allow others their imperfections because we have embraced our own. The path of integration through love also transforms the very meaning of suffering. Suffering, when met with resistance and bitterness, fractures the soul further, isolating the wounded parts and deepening the divide within. But suffering, when embraced with love, becomes an alchemical fire. It burns away illusions and hard defenses. It softens the heart and deepens empathy. It teaches us not merely to endure life's hardships, but to find within them opportunities for greater wisdom and tenderness. In this way, love does not erase pain. It sanctifies it, weaving it into the larger story of who we are becoming. To integrate the self through love is not to arrive at a static state of bliss. It is a dynamic, ongoing process of dialogue with the many inner voices that clamor for attention. Some days the fearful child within may need to be reassured. Other days the rebellious youth may demand to be heard. The wise adult too must have a place at the table. Love listens to all these parts, not to give unchecked control, but to honor their existence and learn from their presence. It is through this inner democracy, guided by the principles of compassion and respect, that the self grows more cohesive, more resilient, and more capable of authentic action in the world. The practice of love as integration also extends beyond the individual to the collective. Just as we disown parts of ourselves, societies disown groups of people who embody traits the dominant culture fears or rejects. The poor, the sick, the outcast, the stranger, these are often the human mirrors of our collective shadow. To love them is to love the disowned parts of humanity itself. To extend compassion to the brokenness outside of us is to affirm that no part of life is beyond redemption. In this way, personal healing and collective healing are intertwined, each reflecting and reinforcing the other. But none of this work is possible without a fundamental shift in how we understand love itself. Love must be seen not as mere preference or sentiment, but as an ethical commitment. It is a discipline, an orientation of the soul toward wholeness, not only in oneself, but in the world. It is the refusal to abandon any part of being, no matter how painful or shameful it may appear. It is the insistence that every fragment of the self, every discarded emotion, every broken dream has a place at the table of the soul's becoming. As we move deeper into this path, we find that love brings light not by obliterating the darkness, but by illuminating it. We realize that integration is not about eradicating our contradictions, but about holding them consciously, creatively, and compassionately. We learn that the work of love is not an easy ascent into purity, but a deep, sometimes harrowing descent into the very roots of it. Yet in that descent we find the treasures we have long sought. The lost vitality, the forgotten creativity, profound connection to life itself. Thus, love, in its truest form, becomes the bridge between the conscious and unconscious, the seen and unseen, the accepted and the exiled. It becomes the great work of the soul's journey, the thread that binds all our broken parts into a tapestry of meaning. In loving ourselves fully, not in spite of our wounds, but because of them, we learn at last how to love others. We extend compassion not only toward the beautiful and the good, but also toward the rejected, feared, and wounded parts of ourselves and others. Human life is a continual unfolding through encounter. We do not become ourselves in isolation. We become through relationship, through the inevitable meeting with what is not us, what resists our control, what challenges and stretches the narrow limits of our self-understanding. The necessity of encounter lies not in its comfort, of often it is profoundly unsettling, but in its power to reveal to us the unfinished nature of our being. To meet the other, whether another person, a situation, or an inner figure, is to be called beyond the small circle of the familiar into a broader, deeper participation in life itself. In every true encounter, there is an element of risk. We risk having our assumptions undone, our certainties questioned, our defenses pierced. We risk the loss of our comfortable self-images and the intrusion of forces we do not entirely understand. Yet it is precisely in this risk that the encounter becomes transformational. Without being challenged by the otherness of the world, we remain trapped in the prison of our own projections, mistaking our own reflections for reality. The self that is never encountered by what lies beyond it remains stunted, clinging to illusions of mastery and separateness. Encounter is not a casual or superficial thing. It demands presence, attention, and an openness to being changed. It is not merely about interaction, for we can interact endlessly with others without truly meeting them. True encounter strips away pretense. It requires us to meet the other as they are, not as we wish them to be. It asks us to lay aside the armor of judgment and control, and to enter into a space where mystery and difference are not threats, but invitations. This is as true of inner encounters as it is of external ones. Within the depths of our own psyche reside forces, images and figures that are unfamiliar, disconcerting, and yet vitally necessary for our growth. The dream figure who confronts us with truths we would rather avoid, the sudden surge of emotion that disrupts our plans, the persistent longing that will not be silenced. These are encounters with dimensions of ourselves that have been hidden or disowned. To turn away from these inner others is to forfeit the richness of our own being. To engage them, however fearfully, is to participate in the unfolding mystery of who we are. In the external world, the necessity of encounter becomes most clear in our relationships with other people. Every person we meet carries within them a world, a history, a complexity, a depth that we can never fully fathom. To truly encounter another person is to recognize that they are not merely an object within our experience, but a sovereign reality in their own right. They are not there simply to fulfill our needs, confirm our beliefs, or fit into our narratives. They exist in their own profound mystery, irreducible to our understanding. Often our initial reaction to true otherness is fear. We fear what we cannot control. We fear the ways in which the other might unsettle our fragile constructions of self and world. But this fear, if we have the courage to move through it, becomes a doorway to greater freedom. In the encounter, we are invited to relinquish the narrowness of our egocentric perspective. We are asked to acknowledge the limits of our knowledge, the contingency of our values, the partiality of our vision. We are called to humility. The necessity of encounter also teaches us that transformation is not something we can engineer or impose. It happens in the tension between ourselves and the other, in the space where our categories break down and new possibilities emerge. It is not a comfortable process. It often feels like disorientation, like loss. But this loss is sacred. It is the death of what is no longer sufficient to contain the larger life that seeks to be born within us. In this way, every encounter carries within it the potential for a kind of sacred wounding, a breaking open of the heart, a shattering of old certainties. If we protect ourselves too rigidly from this wounding, we may preserve our sense of security, but at the cost of aliveness. We remain safe but stagnant. It is only by allowing ourselves to be vulnerable to the impact of the other that we become fully human. Encounter also demands that we listen, not merely with our ears, but with our whole being. To listen truly is to suspend our own internal commentary, our rush to evaluate, to agree or disagree, to categorize and dismiss. It is to create a space within ourselves where the other can speak and be heard in their own right. Such listening is an act of love and an act of courage. It acknowledges that we do not know in advance what the other has to teach us, that we must be willing to be surprised, even undone. As we become more practiced in the art of encounter, we begin to see that the world itself is alive with presence. Every moment, every meeting, every unexpected turn of events becomes an opportunity to engage with the sacred mystery that surrounds and permeates our lives. We realize that life isn't to be managed or conquered, but something to be met with reverence and awe. Thus, the necessity of encounter reveals itself as the necessity of growth, of evolution, of becoming. It reminds us that we are not static beings, but living processes, always in dialogue with the unknown. We come to understand that to truly live is to say yes to this dialogue, to consent to being shaped and reshaped by our meeting with the other. Ultimately, every genuine encounter with a person, with a part of ourselves, with the world, pulls us into a deeper participation in the mystery of existence. It invites us to recognize that we are not isolated islands, but interconnected, woven into the vast, unfolding tapestry of life. To honor the necessity of encounter is to live with an open heart, to welcome the unfamiliar not with suspicion but with wonder, to meet the world not as a fixed and finished entity, but as a living mystery that constantly calls us toward greater depth, humility, and reverence for the mystery of the other. Transformation, in its most profound sense, is not born from force, resistance, or denial. It arises from a subtler, more paradoxical movement of the soul, the movement of acceptance. The human instinct, when faced with pain, failure, fear, or any unwanted aspect of existence, is often to fight, suppress, or escape. We strive to change ourselves, to change others, to remake reality according to our desires and ideals. Yet the more violently we struggle against what is, the more entangled we become in the very conditions we wish to transcend. True change, the kind that touches the deepest layers of being, cannot be coerced. It blooms from the fertile soil of radical acceptance. It is not the passive surrender to circumstances nor the abandonment of effort. Rather, it is the courageous willingness to face the truth of what is, without distortion, without embellishment, without judgment. It is the choice to open the heart to reality in its full complexity, to recognize the presence of darkness as well as light, of weakness as well as strength, of sorrow as well as joy. In acceptance, we stop waging war against ourselves and the world. We cease to divide life into what is allowed and what must be exiled. We dare to behold the entirety of existence, and in doing so we recover a kind of wholeness that no amount of striving could produce. The deepest wounds within us are often maintained not by the events that cause them, but by our continued refusal to accept their reality. When we deny our pain, we trap it in the unconscious, where it festers and distorts our lives in hidden ways. When we judge our fear, we empower it to rule us from the shadows. When we shame our longing, we sever ourselves from the very sources of our vitality. Only by accepting these rejected parts, by acknowledging their presence and legitimacy, can we begin the work of healing and degradation. Acceptance requires an immense humility. It asks us to relinquish the illusion of control, to recognize that we are not the sole authors of our lives, that much of what we experience is shaped by forces beyond our comprehension. It invites us to bow before the mystery of our own becoming, to allow that perhaps even our flaws and failures have a place in the unfolding story of who we are meant to be. This humility does not diminish us, it frees us. It frees us from the exhausting burden of perfectionism, from the endless and futile effort to expunge all traces of imperfection from our being. In this light, acceptance becomes a kind of alchemy. What was once feared becomes a source of insight. What was once despised becomes a wellspring of compassion. The parts of ourselves we sought to destroy reveal themselves as badges of essential truth. The sadness we denied teaches us about tenderness. The anger we suppressed guides us toward boundaries and justice. The weakness we hid becomes a doorway to human connection. Through acceptance, we reclaim the richness of our inner life, not by changing its contents, but by transforming our relationship to it. This work of acceptance must also extend beyond the personal. It must touch our relationships with others, with society, and with the larger movements of life itself. Just as we reject parts of ourselves, we are prone to reject in others what we cannot bear to see in ourselves. We distance ourselves from those who reflect our own disowned qualities. We judge, condemn, and exclude. Yet the transformation of the world begins in the transformation of our gaze. When we meet others, not with judgment, but with acceptance, not with the demand that they conform to our ideals, but with the willingness to recognize their full, complex humanity, we participate in a healing that ripples far beyond our immediate sphere. This does not mean that we must approve of every action, condone every harm, or abandon our discernment. Acceptance is not blind acquiescence. It is the capacity to see clearly and to hold what we see with an open heart. It is a recognition that even those who do harm are often themselves. It is the refusal to dehumanize, to reduce the other to a caricature of their worst moments. Acceptance allows for justice without hatred, for accountability without vengeance, for boundaries without rejection. It unfolds in spirals and returns, in moments of grace and moments of struggle. We may find ourselves opening to a painful truth, only to recoil again in fear. We may taste the freedom of self-acceptance, only to be seized once more by old patterns of shame and self-criticism. This too must be accepted. The process itself is an expression of life's greater rhythm, the rhythm of expansion and contraction, of death and rebirth. Through it all, we are invited to trust a deeper wisdom at work within. Life does not demand that we be perfect. It asks only that we be willing to see, to feel, to stay present, willing to meet ourselves and each other, not with the harshness of judgment, but with the tenderness of understanding, willing to believe that within every wound, every failure, every sorrow, there is the potential for renewal. In the end, we come to see that acceptance is not the end of growth, but its true beginning. It is the place where resistance gives way to flow, where the rigid structures of the ego yield to the creative currents of the soul. It is where life, in all its wild and unmanageable beauty, can at last find a home within. The pursuit of perfection is one of the deepest illusions woven into the fabric of human consciousness. When we dismantle the idol of perfection, we recover a more tender, more realistic relationship with ourselves. We begin to appreciate the particularities of our own being, the quirks, the contradictions, the unique fingerprints of our souls unfold. We recognize that our value lies not in meeting an external standard, but in the authenticity with which we inhabit our lives. We find a new humility, a willingness to laugh at ourselves, to forgive ourselves, to carry our imperfections with dignity rather than shame. This same humility transforms our relationships with others. No longer bound by the need to compare, compete, or judge, we can meet others as fellow travelers on the rocky path of life. We can listen without the inner commentary of superiority or inadequacy. We can offer support without condescension, receive help without humiliation. We can cherish the beauty that arises not from flawlessness, but from resilience, from kindness, from the courage to continue loving in a broken world. The abandonment of perfection also reconnects us with the greater rhythms of nature. In the natural world there is no perfection, only the endless dance of growth, decay, and renewal. The tree does not resent its scars. The river does not mourn its winding path. Life in its vast intelligence embraces imperfection as the medium through which creativity unfolds. When we align ourselves with this deeper wisdom, we find peace not in control, but in participation, not in mastery, but in belonging. Ultimately, the illusion of perfection is a defense against the vulnerability of being alive. It promises safety, certainty, admiration, but it delivers isolation, anxiety, and disillusion. To awaken from this illusion is to return to the messy, glorious, painful, miraculous reality of existence. It is to say yes to life not as we wish it to be, but as it is. In that yes, we rediscover the source of our vitality, our joy, and our deep connection to all that lives. Thus, it is by letting go of perfection that we find wholeness. It is by embracing our incompleteness that we glimpse the possibility of grace. It is by standing honestly in our imperfections that we open the way to love, leading us to true self-acceptance and genuine connection with the world. The power of integration is one of the most profound forces available to the human soul. It is not simply the act of fitting together disparate parts or reconciling opposites, but a deeper transformative process through which we heal and become whole. Life presents us with a paradox. We are born whole, yet as we grow, we fragment into pieces. The ego, shaped by society, culture, and the demands of survival, teaches us to dissociate from parts of ourselves that are inconvenient or undesirable. We suppress, deny, or reject aspects of our being in order to fit into accepted norms to be loved, to be seen as successful. Yet in doing so, we betray the essence of who we truly are. The work of integration is the reclamation of these lost, fragmented parts of the self, the wounded, the rejected, the shamed, and the reassembling of them into a harmonious whole. When we speak of integration, we are speaking not merely of the union of opposing forces, but of a profound healing process. It is the journey of bringing the unconscious into consciousness, of facing what we have avoided, of looking into the darkness within us with eyes of compassion and understanding. Integration is a sacred task that involves a willingness to acknowledge and embrace the parts of ourselves that we deem flawed, broken, or undesirable. These parts are not enemies to be vanquished. They are aspects of our totality, waiting to be understood, integrated, and ultimately transformed. One of the most important aspects of integration is the recognition that there is no final state of perfection to be attained. It is not a matter of eradicating every shadow, every imperfection. Rather, it is the constant process of embracing the fullness of our humanity, the light and the dark, the strengths and the weaknesses, the joy and the sorrow. By accepting and integrating these diverse aspects of ourselves, we allow ourselves to become more authentic, more genuine, and more alive. Integration is not about becoming someone other than who we are, but about becoming more fully ourselves. It is about accepting the wholeness of our existence, which includes everything we have repressed, denied, or overlooked. When we begin the work of integration, we enter into a new relationship with ourselves. No longer do we need to suppress or hide our emotions, our desires, or our fears. We can face them with compassion, understanding that each of them has a lesson to teach us. Our pain is not an enemy to be defeated. It is a guide leading us toward greater self-awareness. Our fears are not signs of weakness. They are invitations to explore the depths of our courage. Our desires are not to be repressed. They are messages from the soul, pointing us toward what we truly need. In the process of integration, we stop seeing ourselves as fragmented, broken, or incomplete. We begin to see ourselves as whole, as a living, breathing expression of the universe's creative power. This process is not without its challenges. The parts of ourselves we have repressed or rejected often carry with them deep pain and fear. we may feel hesitant to face them, unsure of what we will find. There may be moments when the work of integration feels overwhelming, when we are confronted with aspects of ourselves that we do not know how to deal with. But it is in these moments when we are most afraid that the potential for growth is greatest. Integration asks us to embrace discomfort, to sit with the parts of ourselves that we have avoided, to feel what we have long suppressed. Through this process, we learn that there is no part of ourselves that is unworthy of love and acceptance. Every part, no matter how painful or difficult, has value and purpose. The power of integration extends far beyond the individual. When we begin to integrate the various aspects of ourselves, we also begin to integrate our relationships with others. As we learn to accept and embrace our own complexities, we become more capable of doing the same for those around us. We begin to see others not as objects to be judged, but as fellow travelers on the journey of self-discovery. We recognize that they too are filled with contradictions and complexities, with strengths and weaknesses, with light and shadow. And in this recognition, we can offer them the same compassion and acceptance that we have learned to offer ourselves. Integration opens the door to deeper, more authentic relationships, where we can meet others not from a place of judgment or comparison, but from a place of understanding and acceptance. When we practice integration, we also begin to experience a deeper sense of harmony and vitality. The fragmented self is a dissonant self, full of tension, conflict, and exhaustion. The integrated self, on the other hand, is in tune with the rhythm of life. It moves with grace and ease, embracing both the ups and downs, the joys and sorrows of existence. We no longer feel need to fight against our emotions or deny our experiences. Instead, we flow with them, learning from them, growing through them. This is the vitality of the integrated self, a vitality that is rooted not in perfection, but in acceptance. It is the vitality that comes from knowing and embracing every part of ourselves, from finding strength in our vulnerability, and from living in alignment with our true nature. As we continue to integrate the various parts of ourselves, we also begin to experience a deeper sense of purpose and meaning. The more we accept and integrate our authentic selves, the more we align with our true calling. We no longer feel pulled in different directions by external expectations or internal conflicts. Instead, we move with a sense of clarity and direction, guided by the wisdom that comes from embracing our full humanity. The work of integration is a work of alignment with our deepest truths, our core values, and our soul's purpose. It is a process of becoming whole, not just in ourselves, but in relation to the world around us. As we integrate the fragmented parts of our psyche, we become more in tune with the rhythm of life itself, more connected to the pulse of the universe. Ultimately, the power of integration lies in its ability to open the door to a deeper sense of wholeness, harmony, and vitality. It is the path to becoming more fully ourselves, to embracing every aspect of our being, and to living in alignment with our true purpose. By integrating the parts of ourselves that we have long rejected or ignored, we reclaim our power and step into the fullness of life. It is through this process that we find our true strength, our deepest peace, and our most authentic expression of life.